So welcome to this Jupiter retrograde in Capricorn 2020 overview, as well as HoloKompass astrological massive overview of all the cycles of 2020 that I'm going to be doing in this particular webcast event. We have so much to get through, and I want to first just begin with reminding everybody my approach to astrology and why it's unique and different, and also how I want you to enter, let's say, this space with me as intuitives. You know, this is an intuitive tool, and it's a tool that is about synchronicity. So I'm not an astrologer that believes that planets cause anything. That's just not how I roll. I mean, we have astronomy and physics has taught us this is not possible, and it just really isn't true. But what I do know to be true is that we have in our hands now, in this new archetypal and quantum and intuitive age, this tool that I call HoloKompass astrology. I kind of coined that term because it is about, for me, using astrology to find your compass within the holographic field of life. Now, what the ancients did is they had some sort of intuitive knowing that they were in a creative matrix of some kind. And they began to correlate events with these things they began to chart as moving in the sky. And so there was this instinct in them to kind of make connections between what was happening in the stars and watching the movements of the planets, and which they believed, some of them believed, the Babylonians most certainly, that it was the gods writing in the sky to them messages for their fate and their destiny. And also there was a very practical function of astrology back in the ancient times where, you know, for example, the Egyptians would use where Sirius was in the sky to plant crops and know when the Nile was going to rise and then recede, and then get their agriculture going with all of that. And in fact, they were the most successful agricultural civilization at that time because they really knew how to plot these cycles. So what astrology is, and there's so many ways I language this every time, and I want to language it specifically for what I want to share with you about where we're headed in 2020, is it's really this brilliant tool of synchronicity that shows us that what's happening in the outer visible manifested realm, i.e. planets moving in the sky, is also happening inside of us in simultaneity. It's not that one causes the other per se. It's rather that the earth is set up through, we could say, mystical laws. We could just say creative laws, in such a way that we are in this field where things move around and manifest. And as they do so, it's happening both in us and outside of us at the same time. And if I said to you, you know, hey, here's the deal. All of our lives unfold, our potential unfolds, our soul contracts unfold through cycles of time. You'd go, okay, I'm with you. I think most people would say, I'm with you. All right, maybe I don't know what soul contracts are, but I'm with you, you know? But if I said to you also, guess what? These cycles of time are archetypal, which means that they carry an energetics in them, a pattern in them. I think most people would probably track with us, right? And be like, yeah, I that feels true to me. We can all relate to this personally, like we've just had personal cycles of life. Sometimes we demarcate those biologically, biopsychically, by our lifespan, and when we, you know, are in adolescence versus childhood versus adulthood versus midlife versus, you know, our autumn years. But everything in this creative life we live, in the world, moves and manifests and evolves through cycles of time. And most notably, when it comes to Jupiter, which is the anchor that we will be spinning out of in the end game here. I'm going to do a massive overview of a lot of cycles here, but then I'm going to sort of peel off into what Jupiter is about specifically. And my point is, this is all about potential. And what's very interesting to me and always fascinated me and still does today, and I still feel like I'm a student of this, is this dynamic between fate and destiny, this dynamic between karmic cycles and forces that are in a certain trajectory and in motion in a certain way, manifesting events, manifesting situations, manifesting opportunities, manifesting blocks, manifesting, and as we will find out, mountains for us to climb. You know, I think we could spend our whole lives in the mystery of this, that there is something called fate, that there is something that moves through this Earth's psychic field and directs creation. And we have no say in it. There's a level to this where we have absolutely no say. Now, if I said to you, look, neither of us are going to have say about how that sun rises and sets. Those are laws much greater than our personal will, than our personal desires. That's what I mean. There are things in this life that are just going to happen. Until that sun red giants and envelops all of the solar system and everything's gone, the sun will forever rise in the east and set in the west. Now, what's interesting is you start to go into the psychic territory. What happens with a law like that? How does it translate into psychic creative spaces? So, is it true that, well, there are certain psychic creative forces that are in the psychic archetypal field of life that are going to happen no matter what we do? Now, this is where we start to enter into some mystery, because yes and no is the answer. Yes and no. So as we begin to look at these cycles, there's a yes and no in all of them. And that is, I think, why our souls choose to come to this particular playground to grow and evolve, is because we get to experience this thing called fate and destiny. So the fate is the no, you cannot influence certain things. And the yes is, yes, but you can influence certain things, or how you respond to that which you can't influence makes all the difference in terms of what miracle may happen next. So as we approach HoloKompass astrology, and I group you all into this overview for 2020, I have to be honest. I mean, I'm a bit beside myself and blown away. And I was telling my team this and I suppose it's Capricorn, I shouldn't be surprised, but at the shrewd feeling of fate I feel around 2020. There's a lot of fate in the air. So as I bring forward some of the things that I'm going to very thoroughly show you and explain very thoroughly some specific cycles, not just Jupiter. We're not even going to get to Jupiter for at least the next hour. But as I go through everything else and then slot Jupiter in and then go into that, it might feel a bit like, why bother, Robert? I mean, 2020, why bother? I think I'll go back to bed. I'll see you in 2021. Yeah, no, I'm feeling that myself right now. I'm like, ooh. But I got to bring back and thank the gods. This is part of our creative journey, that we do have choice. We do have what I call X factor space. I think in 2020, it's just it's really challenged, but it's still there. So I want to gift you with the psychic weather, if you will, that's ahead. And kind of be very shrewd with you and say, listen, this is just some stuff I don't think we're changing, at least not by one choice alone. And then I also want to be very clear on, these are the things we really can change. It's going to take maybe 10 steps up the mountain, 10 choices up the mountain, 10 shifts up the mountain. But you can change this. We can change this. Now, another thing I want to really emphasize as we enter into, so that's the fate and destiny. That's okay. There's these two forces, I think, never more apparent in an overview for an entire year than I've ever done. I mean, this is going to be very apparent to you, and I want to take great specificity in pointing to, this is the fate, this is a destiny, this is the fate, this is a destiny, and this other level as well, which is this. This really struck me. Most of you have followed my work for a long time. I've always been a teacher that really focuses on the personal and the collective. I think one of the greatest gifts astrology gave me was this way of learning how to intuitively see that way. That I am a me, but I'm also a we, and what we do affects the me. So any choices we make, as a group, cast a vote into each of our personal space and how our fate and destiny roll. And conversely, what I do in my personal space casts a vote back out to everyone else. And that really has to be brought into the fold for this particular overview. It's always true, and I always teach from these truths of, it's a both and, it's you and us, and both matter. But I've never seen such a stark message in the cycles as this next year, where And I think it's because we are so heavy in Capricorn archetypal energy, which is to say we're heavy in karma. One of the main archetypal expressions of Capricorn is through this truth of karma. Choice and action equal consequence. Anything you do over a period of time, especially even just small choices, small habits, small actions, they add up. They compound and compound and compound and eventually manifest themselves in events. And I think it's never more apparent than what's happening with our climate right now. Everything we've been doing the last 100 years is reaching this place where there is a movement of karma that it's heavy. It's a mountain to climb. And so as I move into this, I want you to hold in yourself, and I will make sure I keep coaching you to do so, the understanding of your potential and your destiny is in the hands of the collective in as much as it's in your own. So you might have an ambition, a dream, a goal. And as we peel off, and let's say turn off to the bonus course of this, which is about ascension and taking archetypal steps through mountain climbing to get to our goals. We're going to talk a lot about this, and I'm super excited for that. And I'm so glad I chose that as the bonus course this time, because it couldn't be more appropriate. And it's the best, truly. I'm going to give you a lot of insight and information, but I think that bonus course is the best gift I can leave you with as far as what will help you get through 2020. But that said, I want you to hold in yourself the truth that it's not just you. And we will be in a very karmic year of absorbing the choices we each have been participating in that are going to absolutely create very significant and very concrete events. Let me say it another way. There will be very manifested in 2020 karmic expressions of patterns that have been in motion for a long, long time. And I'm not so sure we're going to like a lot of that karma. We're going to find ourselves sitting in front of massive mountains. All of us together, we're going to have collective mountains we're going to need to figure out how to climb. And then we're going to each individually have our mountains on our own and go, how do I get up this mountain? And I want you to make the connection that both are influenced by the other. And in fact, the mountain in your life that you might find arriving, let's say spring of 2020, or we will find arriving in spring of 2020, may very well be a mountain we've all made together. And I truly do believe, yes, we all can figure out, all right, how are we going to climb this? How are we going to transition this karma into something connecting, affirming, and that will propel our potential forward and our evolution forward in a life-affirming, resourced, and sustainable way. So hold in yourself throughout this whole entire process of going through 2020 with me, that I'm going to be speaking about the cycles out there and the cycles in here. And there really is an interrelationship. You cannot deny it. It's a mystical law. And that's what astrology maps. Now, as I was making this map of all these cycles, it really occurred to me something I want to also impress upon you, and that is this. The map is not the country. I'm going to show you cycles, and they are universal archetypal forces that will affect absolutely everyone. I don't care who you are, whether you believe in astrology, whether you don't. That's the one thing I have learned from this empirically, working with this intuitive tool for over 20 years, is that it doesn't matter what someone believes. Mystical law is mystical law. Synchronicity, the psychic law of synchronicity, is the psychic law of synchronicity, whether you believe in it or not. It just is what it is. And to me, it's just so self-apparent. I think we all relate to what Carl Jung discovered, which is that life is full of this psychic phenomena called synchronicity. And that said, it's really crucial that as you go through this with me, you stay in the territory of the fate and the destiny, your personal sense of power, where you don't have power, where you can have bits of power, but you just got to harness them day by day and realize I'm providing you with a map, but we each live in our own country. Literally. There's people from around the world tonight here. So not only that, literally, metaphorically, I think it's very true. We're all going to experience what's ahead, depending on where we are in the world and where we're at in our evolution, what our soul contracts have going on in them differently, but it's still the same weather. It's still the same weather. Every time I look at a whole year and a whole year's cycles, it's not that I'm talking about something you're not already living. Astrology is not some system in the stars that, is up there and we're down here. It's actually what you live. So what we're looking at is we're looking at a very intuitive and specific way to see it through cycles, through archetypes, etc. And what that gives us is more choice. More, I always like to say technical choice as technicians. Look, this is the karma in motion. These are the optimal choices to shift it, both personally and collectively. So use this guide that way. Use it as an opportunity to chart and map these things as I guide you through it. Now, this particular next hour and a half to 2 hours, however long I end up going here, I will be very astrology heavy. Whereas in the bonus course, I'm probably not going to say anything astrological at all. So just want to, say that this is very astrologically heavy in terms of some of the language. Obviously, I'm going to be speaking about specific cycles that are astrological. I always follow up with what it means. So if you feel like, oh God, what is Jupiter conjunct Pluto and Capricorn square Mars and Aries, Robert? What did you just say? Just those of you who are more seasoned with astrology know exactly what I just said. And those of you who don't, it's all good because I'm going to tell you what it means. What is that energetically? In terms of what will you live in that? What will come up in your experience in that? What's the karma? What's the fate and destiny of that? I will tell you that. So hold tight if something goes whoa over your head and you're going, Neptune what? I got you. So don't worry about those elements. So as you approach this guide, it's very astrological. And hopefully, it's obviously astrology is a passion of mine. I hope it sort of inspires a little passion for you for it as well, because it is a phenomenal tool. Now, I am going to present dates, a lot of them, throughout this guide. They will be in your PDF guide, and I will put some of them actually up on the screen for you to look at, most notably around the Jupiter cycle. These really do matter. So where I want you to use dates is in stuff like this. Okay. Should I make this kind of decision during this time? What did Robert say in that overview? Reference this again. You have lifetime access, so reference it again. If you've got a big decision coming up, I'm going to tell you when all the Mercury retrogrades are. Now, I'm not going into every Mercury retrograde. Those will be separate events I'll do throughout 2020. But I'll tell you when they are. And that's a time to go, oh, it's Mercury retrograde. I need to check in on whether or not this decision during that time would be an optimal decision to make. Is this an optimal timing to make that decision? Now, I don't go into superstition around Mercury retrograde and say no decision should ever be made during a Mercury retrograde. That's complete bullshit. But I will say sometimes that's very accurate because what Mercury retrogrades are moments when more information is trying to get through to you from the holographic field of life that you're not aware of. And you're going to want that information in your awareness before you execute a decision. So use the guide that way with the dates. You're going to want to go, okay, Jupiter's going retrograde. That means for the next 4 months. Yeah, it retrogrades for 4 months. I'm going to need to be in this kind of alchemy and process with these themes, these Capricorn specific themes. So I want you to use the dates for that. Not superstitiously. It's not superstition to me at all. It's just I've worked with this tool for so long and I've mapped it in thousands of people through all the readings I did over the time that I did them for 15 years. And not only that, I watched my own life unfold and still do unfold through these cycles. So they're very accurate. I can't impress that enough that it's very, very, very useful. But stay away from superstition. And if I feel like I'm going into a zone where I feel like superstition could get stirred up in you, I'm going to call out and go, look, don't get superstitious here. Think like a technician. Think like an intuitive. You want to understand these tectonics that way. Because then you're not in superstitious woo-woo. You're in actual intuitive technical choices. around archetypal energies, timing, cycles, what's going on. And, you know, a lot of us are embedded in these. We are embedded in these in a way that we are under clauses in our contract to evolve through them. So there's a process. Think of these as processes. It's all process related to me. But timing is really important. So do track the dates, use them as a guide. Follow any coaching or questions I offer. You know, there's a lot that's going to be coming at you. And I would say you listen to this at least twice. And definitely come back to it throughout 2020, most notably this next year. Because I think there's going to be a lot of moments and a lot of trigger points where you're going to want to come back and go, what are the archetypal coordinates Robert gave us? I got to come back to that before I make my next decision, or so I understand at least a little better exactly what karmically is going on with everything. Now, when it comes to the Jupiter retrograde part of this, I will say, you know, all retrograde cycles bring up something that's unconscious or in your potential, which sort of means it's also unconscious. You know, potential, and it's a huge Jupiter word as an archetype. It's like Jupiter's whole big, you know, field of creation is about our potential, as are Jupiter cycles. So potential is something that exists in potentia. It means it's not here yet. It's not manifested yet, but it does have the inherent capacity of coming into being. So we're going to be looking at lots of different potentials. And when we get to the Jupiter side of this, that's where I'm going to talk about, okay, and we're going to do a lot of dancing between the collective and the personal there. Collective potential, personal potential, collective. But my point is the retrograde itself is going to ping sort of this plan for your life that you're not fully aware of yet. This plan of potential for your life you don't fully see. And every retrograde does that in its own way. And we've got so many retrogrades, folks. I'm going to go through all of them. It's every planet is retrograde in 2020. And not all of them retrograde every year. So I don't want you to use astrology as a victim. In fact, that's one of the things that irks me the most about a lot of the way astrologers present astrology, as if the planets are causing this and go and hide. No. And hear me in your head looking at you with a lot of love, but also a lot of like, really? And going, excuse me, are you a co-creator or a victim? I'm a little confused right now. You know, and you might be a little bit of both, like, you know, I am, but hey, let's lean into the co-creator, which means to say, do we, you know, when we have a rainstorm, shame ourselves for the rainstorm? I mean, maybe we should a lot now with climate change, but my point is, cycles are part of life. You know, nature doesn't shame herself for winter. So I don't want you to use any cycle or any of this to frame things from a victim perspective. And that's really going to matter a lot when it comes to mountain climbing. You're not getting up the mountain as a victim. You might, in fact, die on the mountain. That is one of the archetypes that will clip you out and leave you there to die. Never take anything I say astrologically or that I present to you as a way to victimize yourself, or see life as if it's victimizing you, as if the universe is some damning, wrathful Yahweh God that's sending you Jupiter retrogrades, Pluto square Marses. Just don't. Stay in the, you know what, this is the fabric of creation here. I was born at this time for a reason. My soul chose this evolutionary path of growth for a reason. And it wasn't to collapse on a mountain as a victim and die. Well, it certainly will always be an option, but it's not the one I want you to lean into, clearly. So don't use astrology that way. All right? This web series is meant to guide you into a destined process of evolving a new level of your life's potential and your life's capacity to manifest that potential. The cycles themselves outline a certain kind of fate. Definitely true. We're looking at weather. It's like we're just looking at patterns here. They are what they are. And within that fate is an archetypal code. There is a certain archetypal instruction in every cycle. So to act as if there isn't some instruction sort of takes you out of any capacity to live in a destiny within that fate. You've got to approach this as, okay, there's a code here. You know, it's like the wind's blowing. Do I set up my sail and let my boat move forward? Or Do I just sit here and let it keep blowing? Or maybe it's a strong wind and it'll break the sail. Maybe I need to bring the sail down. I mean, you see what I'm saying? You've got to know the codes, the whispers in the cycle that are on the wind of that cycle. If you decode that, if you listen, now you're working with a momentum versus against it. That is a fated momentum, but you can harness that into amazing stuff. You could sail around the world if you learn how to work with the wind, work with weather. So I want you to use this guide and astrology overall that way, how you can set sail around the world and avoid, to the best that you can, tsunamis and cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons and the stuff that would wipe you out on the seas. So as we begin this next section of this particular webcast event, I'm going to guide you now into a complete astrological overview of 2020. And then what we'll do is we will transition from there into specifically the Jupiter cycle. So the thing that must be, I think, first said around the cycles for 2020 is that all cycles are interconnected in a continuum. So to understand what 2020 is going to, let's say, do, bring, manifest, what potentials are available to us in 2020, what the cycles will feel like, the archetypes involved, we've got to look back at 2019. We got to know where we're coming from. In fact, when I would do intuitive readings, that's exactly what I would always do. I'd always look back at least 2 years in your field to understand where are you now and where are you going. And most notably for this particular overview, I think it's crucial to look at this, in fact, through the lens of karma. What karma, that's why I did that meditation at the beginning, is already in the room for you. What karma is already behind you that's pushing you forward at your back. Now, positive or negative or both. Let's just think as technicians. Now, as we think as technicians around 2019's momentum and its karmic sort of cycles and forces, I also want you to think about you and them. How were you, if you could start to reflect back, and what's really interesting about this particular year, I mean, we're in a decade shift in 2020. So you could even go back 10 years and go, what about this last decade? But most notably, what about 2019? Now, when I say, what about 2019? What was that like for you? What's the first kind of sense you get for yourself around the energies of 2019? If anything at all, what comes up for you when I say, hey, if you could just generally state and sum up 2019, what would you say? Now, it's a little homework for you, obviously. You'll need to take some time and maybe sift through that. But I do want you to do that. I want you to go back into 2019 and go, well, what was going on? Now, I'm going to tell you what was going on archetypally, energetically, karmically, per these cycles of 2019. And some of these cycles are not just 2019. They do, in fact, stretch back even further than a decade. So we're starting at the one that stretches back the longest, and that is Pluto in Capricorn. Now, as I go through this particular webcast event and guide you through all these cycles, there is so much, folks, that I could say about each cycle. I mean, clearly, you guys know I can talk and I can give information. I have other astrological things I've done that I will refer you to if you want to pursue certain threads deeper. I recommend you do, and most notably around Pluto and Capricorn. And that said, I did a very in-depth webcast event on Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn a couple of years ago. All of it is still absolutely relevant, in fact, more relevant than ever. So if you didn't take that, you might want to check that out on my website and just go and see if it speaks to you. That said, Pluto has been in Capricorn. I'm gonna summate some of this for you, of course, since January 25th, 2008. And it's one of those cycles that is very, very long. And I'm going to go through each of these cycles real quick here. These are the cycles of 2019, by the way. And then I'm going to go through them again in more depth in terms of 2020. But for now, I need you to understand that there's been a very powerful cycle, Now, I want you to think about something. What happened in 2008? Anything ring a bell real quick? Well, let me just tell you what happened. We had one of the worst financial crises in our history worldwide, most notably the US. But as we are now one global economy, if we fall, everyone does to some degree as well. And so Pluto going into Capricorn represents, and this is how this works, a planet like Pluto, which deals with so many things, but power, the shadow side, the nuclear dynamics of power that could completely destroy and wipe us all out, or generate energy to give energy to all of our homes. That's what nuclear power can do. Power that has toxic side effects like nuclear power. Power that straddles, therefore, let's say like the sun, life and death. The sun both gives life, and you're in the desert, you could, burn up and die without water. This is Pluto's territory. And most notably, Pluto's terrain is Hades, the underworld, where we have stored power, but also amped up shadow fragments of ourselves, both personally and collectively. This is all Pluto's lair. Now, and that's just a little brief sampler. So Pluto going to Capricorn really represents an activation of this of Pluto. Let's say it this way: Pluto activating into the collective psychic field shadow Capricorn dynamics. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about Capricorn, because this is all we're going to be talking about mostly. It is everywhere I turned. There's so much going on with this archetype in 2020. But I want you to understand what it is. Now, in the 12 zodiacal signs of astrology, each sign represents, let's think of it this way, a patterned phase of human ego and mystical development. I'm going to say it like 3 different ways. Each sign represents a phase of human psychological development into a human ego. Each phase represents a phase of human development in terms of our potential. Each sign represents that. So if I started at Aries, the very first sign of astrology, which will be coming up again through other cycles later, I'm going to say, you know what that represents? It represents your spirit fusing into identity. The very first thing that happens when you are born is you're given a name. You're given identity in this earth dimension of existence. And then that evolves, and then you get to Taurus, and then you start to develop an awareness of your body. This happens around 2 years old. Then you get to Gemini, the next sign, and you start to develop language and communication. This starts to happen between 3 and 4 years old. Then you get to Cancer, the next sign, and then you start to develop into a sense of tribe and family. You start to realize I'm part of a family system and unit. Then you get to Leo, and then it's how do I express my creative individual sense of self out of this family? And then you get to Virgo, where you're having to start to learn that your body's now going to start kicking into, and this is around 8 or 9 years old, these physiological cycles of growth, and your health and everything starts to change, and you realize you're part of systems and societal systems, and each one progresses in a organized, organic way. And I could look at them as patterns. I could look at them as phases. We could look at them as archetypes. All of it is true. But what's Capricorn? So I'm going to bring Sag in here, because in 2019, Jupiter was in Sagittarius with its own instruction, which I'll cover in a second. But I want you to understand this thread for now. That when Jupiter was in Sagittarius, and what Sagittarius is as an archetypal phase of development, is where we go to higher education. Now, that's a very broad field to explore. We could go into, what does that mean? Are we doing women's studies at college? Yes, that applies. Are we doing philosophical studies? Absolutely. Am I getting trained in more of a masterful skill? Yeah, it could be that at community college. But what it represents, and there's many levels to this, it depends on where you're at in your evolution, in terms of which classroom in Sagittarius activates for you. But it is nonetheless higher education. And the end game, at I'd say the highest university level of this, you're studying the intuitive nature of mystical truth here. Now, last year I did a Jupiter in Sagittarius about that, and how truth, the intuitive nature of mystical truth, becomes the fuel for soul esteem, for confidence, for courage, and the truths you are aligned to, consciously or unconsciously, fuel a certain esteem, confidence, and courage in you, a belief in yourself. Do they not? So if I'm aligned to a damning, wrathful God, and my truth is that God is damning and wrathful, that's going to do a frickin' number on my confidence, certainly my esteem, and ergo my confidence and my courage. I'm going to walk around life as if the whole of life is like walking around on eggshells, lest I be smited down by Yahweh. Just a thread. Now, what happens in Capricorn, this is the next evolution, is whatever happens in Sag for you, in your development, it positions you now to go to the collective society around you and fulfill a role. We call this a job. We call this a career. We go to the higher levels of perfume quality of this. We call it calling. I like the hyphenated calling career because it wipes out this idea that you can't have success in a mundane material way if you're spiritual. So Capricorn is about your capacity as an individual in your development to stand with a spiritual backbone in group energy in the world and say, you know what? I had to climb a mountain to get here, but in the climb, I gained these gifts and skills that I will now use in service to you through a job, calling, career, whatever it is. That's Capricorn. One level. Now, when we get to Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, where Jupiter's going the next 3 years through these signs, we're in a realm and territory here that deals with the, I'd say, deeply activating truth. That we can no longer think of our personal sense of destiny in a singular personal way. What 2020 will begin to very much show all of us is that the potential for our individual destinies is absolutely predicated by the kind of social law and order we have in our lives so that we can even go out there and do anything other than just survive. I think what we will be absorbing in 2020, as I get into these cycles and break this all down deeply, is the fact that this has always bugged me about a lot of the parts that I find in spirituality, by the way. There's a certain vein of spirituality that most of you are probably very familiar with, where it's always the focus for a fulfilled, abundant life and living your potential in the world is based on gratitude, being positive. You never hear people say, for the most part, that you know what your capacity to go thrive in the world's based on? The mountains others climbed before you, such that you could even have the right to go out there and pursue a different destiny than they could. And that's what I think is going to start pressing back on all of us, is this realization that if I want this freedom to be fully expressed in my potential to serve others in a Capricorn, steadfast, this is my service to life kind of way, I can't do that without a culture and society and law and order, which is Capricorn. That allows me to do that in the first place. And what we're seeing worldwide is a challenge to all of those things. And also a revelation of where they were effed up all the while, no matter what. It was corrupt. It was always corrupt. And what is in front of us, now this is where we start to look at so look at the headlines right now. You want to read on 2020? Where do you think all that's happening now in culture is going to go next? That's your read. That's your first read. Well, that karma's already here. It's headed somewhere. Personally to you, I would say, so is your karma. So whatever habits, patterns, choices, loops you're in, they're gonna go somewhere.